Welcome to Bandit's Keep. I'm Daniel. Today I want to talk about the idea of running a heroic campaign. So this is inspired by a video I watched a few weeks back. It wasn't somebody I follow normally, so I don't know who it was, but basically they were talking about how they were running a campaign and it kind of petered out. Well, it didn't work, right? And they basically stopped the campaign. They're going to run something different. And I don't want to say it was the person was blaming the system, but they were definitely talking a bit about the system. And I will admit that in my mind, the system does matter on some level, right? That is to say that if you are running a certain system, some kind of play is generally easier to accomplish, or maybe it lines up a little cleaner, and other systems it doesn't. So that is to say, if you're running something that is, right? So I'm gonna argue against the heroic thing in a second, but let's say you're running Call of Cthulhu, right? Call of Cthulhu is an investigation game. It's a horror game. The PCs generally, if you're not playing Pulp Cthulhu or Delta Green, the PCs are generally not designed, or people don't generally design PCs to be like fighters. The monsters are tremendously tough, right? So what you end up doing is you find yourself in a situation where you are often the victim, unless you can be clever or avoid things. You're not going into a Call of Cthulhu game saying, oh, there might be some kind of monster, let's go kill it, right? That's just not the game that is generally played with Call of Cthulhu. Could you do that? I mean, could you arm your PCs really well and use good tactics and take things out? Yeah, I think you could. You know, it might not line up exactly with the game, and that might be one or two special sessions during a campaign where you decide to, okay, we need to take out this group of cultists, and because they've brought up forth some kind of, otherworldly being, and we're going to take it out. So we're going to go get flamethrowers. And I mean, there's even, Lovecraftian stories where people, get weapons and go after things, right? So it's not like you can't do it. But generally speaking, if somebody comes to you and says, hey, you want to join a Call of Cthulhu campaign? You're not thinking, oh, we're going to go fight Migos. On the other hand, it can be argued that if somebody says, hey, do you want to join my whatever flavor of D&D campaign, that you probably are going to be fighting things, right? Because combat is one of the hallmarks or one of the parts of the pillars of these style of games, from D&D to Pathfinder to any of these ones that are kind of the offshoots of them. But this video is not about whether or not a system can be used for something or how you might do it, or maybe it is about that. Let's see where we go. It's really about the idea that this was an OSR game they were playing, Shadow Dark, if it matters, and the idea was that they wanted to run this campaign where the PCs were kind of aggressors. They were going into a dungeon area or some kind of a location, and they were meant to be almost like shock troops, and they were coming in and they were attacking and they were doing things. And they said that it didn't really work out so well because the PCs didn't feel like they were heroic enough, or maybe the death rate was too high. I don't remember the exact reasons, but it made me think a little bit of the OSR primer, which I'll probably talk about maybe in another video this month if I get another one out this month, because it's OSR October. And in that, Matt Finch says, in the original version, I'm not sure about later, I know that was redone, one of the Zen moments, as they will, or aha moments, is heroic, not superheroic. Now, for some reason, a lot of people that play these kind of OSR games tend to say, average, not heroic. Whereas I kind of agree with the Matt Finch, heroic, not necessarily superheroic. That is to say, you can run a game in BX, or I'm assuming Shadow Dark. I'm no expert of Shadow Dark, but I've read the rules and looked through it. I see how it works. Or any of these OSR games, and you can play heroic characters and you can do heroic things. I think that the question is, what does heroic even mean? So I guess for me, heroic is what your characters do and what they accomplish. Superheroic would be maybe powers and abilities. I don't think of powers and abilities as heroic. I think you can be a hero with the most basic tools and being creative. You can be a hero without magic powers. I mean, we have people in real life, right, that we would consider heroes, right? A hero is somebody who faces odds that are against them and overcomes them through, various things: skills, sheer force of will, luck, planning, teamwork. This is what makes something heroic. It's the ability to take characters who are very much flesh and blood, if you will, and they are vulnerable. They can die. They don't have unlimited healing. They don't have unlimited magic, but they're able to push and do things that you would think a normal person couldn't do. And the reason why is because of various things. The way they act, the players being smart, maybe a little bit of extra ability, maybe they have spells or this kind of thing. And again, superheroic might be you are, Superman, so as the latest movie, where you're, invulnerable to a lot of things, or you're Batman and you have unlimited resources, or you're Spider-Man and you basically can sense any danger and avoid it. These are more superheroic things, and I think that a lot of these kind of more OSRE games don't tend to go there. But the thing is that I've said OSR multiple times, the way the video was slotted wasn't old school, it was simple. So can simple games versus crunchy games be heroic? And again, I think the only thing a crunchy game gives you is crunch, right? Details, grittiness, a little bit of kind of more feeling of the world, more options, more kind of tactical choices maybe that are in the rules, but it doesn't make the characters less heroic when you're playing a game that's pretty simple. I mean, you can play original Dungeons & Dragons like I do and have really heroic moments where characters beat the odds, where they fight dragons, where they do all kinds of stuff. I've talked about this before, the games that I like to run, and the systems I generally use for these are simpler systems. But I do think, and this is the reason why I bring up the old school primer, or the primer for old school, or whatever, I forget how it's called. I'll put a link to it. And in that, the reason for that primer, in my mind, and again, I'm not Matt Finch, and I've never even met Matt Finch. The reason for that primer, it seems, if you read it, is it's directed at people who aren't used to playing a certain kind of system, or they're not used to playing a certain way, right? So the primer is aimed at people that maybe come from a system where things are done this way, and in these old school systems that they're talking about, I'm pretty sure he's talking about OD&D, maybe AD&D in the primer, things are done a little bit different. And I think that's also what we have to think about here. If you are playing with a group that's come from a game where their characters have lots of hit points, or lots of combat abilities, or lots of spells, or just other things that make them just on the character sheet, just right out of the gate, pretty powerful, then, compared to an average person, then when you introduce them to a game where they're only maybe 10% more powerful versus 3 times as powerful than an average person, they have to rethink how they operate. And that can be fun. I mean, maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you're just like, no, I would rather play a game where this is this and this is that. But I think that you can. I think if you really like a game, like you like Swords and Wizardry, you like Shadow Dark, you like Dungeon Crawl Classics, you like any of these games, and you want to run them OSE, right? You want to run them in a way that is more heroic. It just requires kind of a understanding between you as the dungeon master or referee and the players as to how these heroic things are accomplished. That is to say, I was thinking about it as I was kind of setting up to do the video. If you look at something like and again, it's been a long time since I've run 5e, so the terms I might be a little bit off. Go ahead and tell me what they're called if I'm wrong. One of the versions of the fighter, or one of the slots you can take, is like the battle fighter, or what maneuver master or something like that it's called. And basically you get a bunch of points, and these points allow you to do different things. A trip attack, a push attack, an extra damage attack, whatever. And you use your points, they're almost like spell slots in a way. You use them to do these different things, and I mean, you still have to hit and stuff, obviously. But then there's an action that happens, right? You do your special attack, and it does this thing. And that's one way of thinking about it. I have my arsenal of special attacks, and this is what I do in combat, and this works out really well, and I'm used to that. Then you look at a game like DCC that has Mighty Deeds. You're a fighter, and anytime you attack, there's no points needed. If you roll high enough, you can do a Mighty Deed. But the difference is, while they do give you a few examples, Mighty Deeds are much more open-ended and more based on the world. That is to say that depending on what's going on in the world, what's in the space around you, what's happening in the actual combat, the Mighty Deed is going to be determined, right? You what's going on, what's happening, how are we going to use the environment, how are we going to use these things? And it's not to say you can't do those in the 5e Battlemaster. I think it's called Battlemaster. I could be wrong about the name. But you necessarily don't have to, right? You can just say, I do my X attack and I roll my dice. And obviously people are going to want to be creative and how they think about it. But there's no need for them for the GM to go, oh, you got a mighty deed. What do you do? And now or I think you're supposed to state it first, but you get my point. There's just a difference, right? There's not a difference that makes it so you can't be heroic. Or, I mean, again, I think heroic is easy, but even that you can't be super heroic. I think the difference is that you have to just approach games in different ways if you want to try different systems. And there's something to be said for really open-ended systems that don't have defined moves or defined areas, that systems where the player characters have to do different things to get to different places. So, for instance, you might need to get a magic sword or a wand or some armor before you're able to take on certain tasks that you would be able to normally do in a system where you started off a little bit more robust. There's kind of this part of the system that makes it so that if you want to do this heroic thing, heroic now as an action, then you've got to have items, you've got to be in a certain situation. You can also play slightly higher level. I often suggest this when you bring somebody into some of these older games, if they're coming from a game where they're typically running more characters that have a lot more to do, like more stuff on their character sheet, more hit points, more combat abilities, just start at a higher level. This will also help. But again, I'm circling back on myself. How crunchy do we need to be in order to be able to do heroic deeds? Well, if you take my definition of heroic is what the party does, how they overcome odds, how they use their environment around them, how they outthink the bad guys, then I don't think you need to be that crunchy at all. But you have to have a table that's on the same page, a referee or GM that is willing to give the players the benefit of the doubt, and players that are willing to take risks, right? Because nothing should go without risk. If you want to try to swing from the chandelier, there's a chance that you might not hit your target, right? But I think if we were clear and defined and we let the players know that and they feel comfortable with the risk, then they're more likely to do it. It's another conversation I often have where people will talk about how, they said I told the referee I wanted to do this with my character, and then they said roll a die, and I rolled low, and then all of a sudden, I took damage. I would never tell a player that, personally. If I want players to try things and push things beyond, I would say, if you swing from the chandelier and try to drop kick this guy, if you miss, you're going to land on your back, you're going to take a little bit of damage, and you're going to be prone. If you hit them, they're going to take double damage, or whatever. You'll need to knock them out of the window, which is what you're trying to do, or whatever, right? You might even say you're going to go out the window if you fail. And again, that's fine. The player can go, is it worth it? What's my chance of hitting here? How awesome would it be if I was able to do it and end this combat? But when you do something like this and then you make them take damage if they fail, and there's so many hit points in the bad guy, and the setup is that they're just going to do extra damage, it's not going to matter, then that's how you establish situations where things aren't heroic. It doesn't have anything to do really with the crunchiness of the system. It has to do with how you interact with the world as a referee, creating situations, and how the players do. And if you want a game that's heroic and you want the players to feel like heroes, you've got to let them act like heroes and let them succeed when the dice go in their favor. Now, if you want super heroic, that might be beyond some of the more simple games, although there are certainly superhero games that are simple. So maybe that's not true either. I would love to hear what you have to say about this. A little quick addendum here. I was just at ShireCon, and we played Marvel Superheroes. So we played the original yellow box, not the one that says Revised Edition, but the original one. And we had certain characters we were playing, and I was looking at the cards and my character's abilities and stuff. And then I looked at my version of Marvel Superheroes, which is the Revised Edition. And I noticed that they changed the way that they created the characters. The characters had much more codified skills that they could do as a superhero. Whereas in the older version, they basically just said something like I had Captain Marvel. It was like, you can change into different forms of energy. That's all it said, right? How do you interpret that? How do you use that? Where do you... And I thought, anyways, I was being super creative with how I used it, but it didn't say in this other version that I could do some of the things that I did, like turn into, electricity and go through the power lines, right, to get into a building. It didn't say that I could do that in this newer version. And you could see somebody saying, well, you can't do it, it's not listed. And that's the more crunchy system. So I don't know that crunch gives us heroism. I don't know that crunch even gives it longevity or action. I think crunch is fun and a different way to play, but I don't think it's needed. I think if you are trying to run a heroic game and you're not having success with the campaign, it might be that you need to have an out-of-game chat, right, with the group, make sure everybody's on the same page, and then also just let them know your players, they can succeed at things. When they say, oh, we couldn't do anything, say, well, what did you want to do? And when they're like, well, this, and this, you can say, well, you could have tried that. Why didn't you? Obviously, I probably made that sound like I was being very chastising people, but you know what I'm saying. Maybe you don't know. Let me know in the comments if you know what I'm saying. Anyways, I know I'm getting rambly here, but it was just kind of an interesting thought because I often see people, talk about games, and I've had game situations that didn't work for me or did work or whatever, and you try to figure out the reason why. And it's easy to say when you've just recently switched to a system that, oh, it was the system. But it might also just be the way that you're thinking about the game. So when you switch to a new system, whether you go from OD&D to Pathfinder 1 or you go from Pathfinder 1 to OD&D, there is going to be a change in how the players interact with the world. And that change is something that it's a journey, right, that you go on with your players. And you want to make sure that you're kind of working together so that everybody's kind of getting what they want. And that alone should help you get basically to the style of campaign that you want. Now, it very well might be that your player characters aren't even interested. You could say, oh, this is how we're going to do this heroic thing, and you're going to be able to do this. But they might not want to do the things that you planned for the campaign. That's also the case, right? So always keep that in mind. Talk to your players, see where they want to go. Interact with them. Yes, you're creating adventures. Yes, you're creating a world, but you want to create stuff that the player characters want to do. So communication is always super important. And whenever I see a video or somebody talking about a campaign that failed or one that was really successful, it's always just interesting to see what they say and kind of read between the lines a little bit and see how what happened there could help you in your campaigns to make your campaigns run longer if that's what you're looking for. I think a lot of us are looking for that dream of the really long campaign, but how long does a campaign have to be successful? Maybe it can be too long. Maybe that's another video. Maybe I went on too long. I don't know. Like the video if you liked it. I guess don't like it if you didn't like it. Leave a comment. I would love to know what you think about this. Heroic in these kind of older games. If you want to call them OSR or old games, or do you need crunch to be heroic? What's the difference between heroic and super heroic? I would love to hear what you think about that. And yeah, I'll talk to you soon.